This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Alpesh Patel, Dealmaker, UK Government Department for International Trade. UK Government's Department for International Trade has under it the Global Entrepreneur Program. In it, dealmakers are business people who make deals with overseas outstanding tech scale-up companies to land their global HQ in the UK. They help companies with VCs, angels, potential customers, and more. Alpesh, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Great. So what was your background before investing in early stage companies?
Well, a very long time ago, I trained as an attorney, a barrister, as we call them over here in the UK, the ones who wear the wigs. And I used to work in the US Congress when I was a student. And then I left all of that to start investing in public companies, principally American listed companies. And the very first column that I wrote in the Financial Times, they asked me to write a weekly column about my trading, stated how I'm investing in a whole bunch of US listed companies. So there's been a lot of connections with the United States. And then eventually I set up a hedge fund and added a private equity arm to that. And then the UK government said, well, look, you're doing this for yourself, where you're picking companies and picking stocks. And I'd had a profile, Bloomberg TV, another great American company. They'd asked me to do my own show, which I did for 5 years on there about investing. So as a result of all of these sort of high profile thing, the FT, Bloomberg books I'd written, the government said, would you like to do this for us? And so I look now for outstanding technologies with a view to landing the entrepreneur and the technology and their global headquarters into the United Kingdom, always keeping a base wherever that might be, whichever country they might be in. And in actual fact, again, another sort of coincidence, you're based out in Austin, Texas. The person who heads up this program for the UK government was the former consul general for the UK government based out of Austin in Texas. So there's a lot of connections here.
That's great. A lot of good history there as well. So what excites you right now?
The funny thing is, I guess as an entrepreneur, you're always excited about what's coming along. And even during this pandemic time, there's always new sectors. There's an acceleration more so than ever to technology. And we see that with what's happening in the listed sector, NASDAQ companies, the big giants there. And if anything, this acceleration has meant there's more of a focus with the startups and the scale-ups, which are setting up. And I think more so than ever, entrepreneurs are excited about the future, despite what we're seeing, in the global economy and worries about the virus and Brexit and all of these other things you might think people are worried about. In actual fact, when I speak to entrepreneurs, they're not. They just see other people might see as a hurdle or a challenge. They see it as an opportunity. And I find that exciting. And then if you were to ask me which sectors, well, at the moment, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, big data, and there's always new sectors coming along. And 5 years ago, we might have said a whole bunch of different ones. And 10 years ago, we said different things. So there's always new things coming along. So in a way, I guess like most entrepreneurs, I'm just excited about everything.
It's exciting times. We have a whole new set of careabouts, a rising stock market. Many things are happening now that's where the startups really thrive, is when you have a new set of careabouts and money to go and pursue them. So what's your advice for people investing in startups? What do you tell them to do before they write that first check?
Well, the funny thing is, obviously, I look at things from both sides. I've got to speak to the investors, like you rightly point out, the angels, or it might be the VCs. Obviously, the VCs don't need my advice on what to do. That by that stage, they've professionalized it. But let's talk about the angels. And also, I've got to speak to the companies and tell them what they should be getting right. So if we start off with the angels, first of all, most of the angels, and particularly in the UK, where now there's crowdfunding platforms, and the UK is Europe's largest crowdfunding market, the great thing for the angels is a lot of their hard work's being done for them. See, in the past, I'd have to say to them, make sure you look at the financials, you understand the P&Ls going forward. You can do a discount cash flow valuation, that you can look at the balance sheet, you can understand it, look at the numbers properly, look at the pitch deck, look at the, interview the individuals, because after all, it's always the entrepreneurs you're investing in, look at their track, all the usual stuff which people now know what to do. Well, actually, the great thing is the crowdfunding platforms just make that so much easier, because they do that and they make sure that information is uniform across all companies, so you can easily compare investments. And that way, no longer is it, Alpesh, I invested in XYZ because they're the only ones who came up to me. Now it's like, well, actually, Alpesh, I compared several companies and I could see this one had better growth than that one. This had a better valuation. This one, the entrepreneurs just came across better and so on. So I guess it's always, in one sense, I guess it's the Warren Buffett statement. You'd rather invest in great individuals with a mediocre product than a great product with mediocre people behind it. So it's always the person, the entrepreneur that you're really putting the capital into and you're backing. Obviously, when it's an angel investment, you want the great product and the great individual.
Well, great. And then on the other side of that table, what do you tell that startup to do before they go out and raise funding?
Well, now, this is what 90% of my time in my government role is spent on doing. Because I cover for the UK government markets like India, Southeast Asia, so Malaysia, Singapore. If it wasn't for the lockdown, I'd be out there right now. Hong Kong. And because I'm looking right across fintechs, over the last 15 years since I had the Dealmaker role, and don't forget, I'm running the private equity fund alongside this. So for the last 15 years when I've had this government role, the same things kept coming up. People asking, well, Alpesh, how should we pitch it? How do we get the warm introduction to the relevant VC? How do we know they're looking to raise? How do we know they're in our sector? And all of this. And in the end, I just got tired of telling them the same things over and over again. And so I created a free resource base where they had all the best resources to every single UK VC, every single UK angel group, every single crowdfunding group, every incubator, accelerator on there, plus the best advice. And very often, I have to say, it comes from Americans because they are very good at this, the best advice on how to pitch, the templates for the pitch deck that they should have, what the financial model should look like, and a template for that. And I got all these free resources, which entrepreneurs are too busy to find and look for, put it all into one free base. So it made my job easier. And that platform, by the way, it's called tech2great.com, as in technology, the number 2, great.com, because we're trying to solve the world's biggest problems, the greatest problems that the world faces through this. And so, what I tell them is the first place I now tell them to look is have a look at all of those resources, have a look at the best pitching advice on there from people like Guy Kawasaki. Okay. It doesn't get better. Have a look at the template pitch decks that are on there. Have a look at the people you want introductions to. And then I even explain to them how to get those warm introductions. Don't just blanket email them and so on. So there's a process to all of this, which requires a bit of research. And you know what? The best entrepreneurs, they'll do that research and then they'll come back to me and they'll say, right, Alpesh, it's this fund or this angel group. This is what I want from them. This is how you showed me I should draft the email. This is how the pitch should be. I've validated the idea using the resources you gave. I'm good to go. So they can do 99% of what they'll be best placed to do. And then I can just add in the sort of the door opening bit and the extra bespoke information, which they might not have got otherwise. And that's a win-win for everyone.
Well, that's good advice. So you've seen the investing world for some time. How do you see the industry evolving today for startups?
I think there's just going to be more and more capital going towards Well, let's talk supply and demand. I think there's going to be an increased supply in capital just as the world gets wealthier. And if you want to know if the world's getting wealthier, just look at your own stock market. It's clearly getting wealthier. The global economy is set to grow according to the IMF next year. And grow at levels we've not seen since the Second World War. Obviously, this year it took a hit, but to grow. So if there's more wealth, that means there's more supply of capital. So the supply of capital, which is essential to growth entrepreneurs, that's going to be there. The efficiency with which the entrepreneur can matchmake with the capital is improving all the time because there's platforms. There's angel lists out of the US, for instance, as well as all these crowdfunding platforms in the United Kingdom as well. That makes it so much more frictionless to marry investor and opportunity. So that trend is going to increase because the way towards all liberal markets is towards greater efficiency. And the two greatest inefficiencies in the markets which cause failure, which cause difficulty, are a lack of information. Well, that's going because of these platforms, and friction cost, the cost of meeting someone, getting the information, getting the data. Well, as these platforms commoditize the presentations, the way it should be exhibited, that means they're upskilling the entrepreneurs and they're making it easier to get that information. So that's the huge change I'm seeing there. Then when it comes to demand, there's going to be a massive demand amongst entrepreneurs because the entrepreneurs are getting ever more ambitious. They look at Tesla. Let's give American examples. They look at the likes of Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, and they say, well, wait a minute, I want to be global. I don't just want to serve my domestic or local market. And so we're getting more and more entrepreneurs, not least because the jobs market's changing. There's no more jobs for life. And those kind of dislocations mean that more people are being more entrepreneurial. And then America is, of course, the most entrepreneurial country in the world. But that trend is going to continue to the rest of the world. I think the rest of the world is going to become more American, if I can put it that way. And that means there's going to be a constant supply of entrepreneurs demanding this capital. And they're going to need upskilling. And that's what platforms like yours does. It gives them that information. It trains them up because it requires an education, which we don't get in school. And so the good thing is there's going to be an ever increasing demand for this. And we're in the right space at the right time.
What's the biggest change you see coming up in the next 5 years?
In one sense, because I invest in companies, you could argue I'm in the forecasting business. Let me tell you, the one lesson that I've learned, it's the unknown unknowns, as Dick Cheney put it. It's the blasted unknown unknowns. I'm going to look foolish in 5 years when you play this back and I tell you it's XYZ, because I didn't see COVID. I didn't see the financial crisis in 2000. I wasn't looking at US housing data to find it in 2008. And I certainly wasn't looking at, Bill Gates' videos where he said, viruses are probably the thing we need to worry about. It's probably as much as likely to be something I tell you as it is to be an alien invasion. So my point is, I don't know what the biggest change will be, but what I do know is we absolutely need resilience. Our companies need resilience, and we need resilience personally. That means mental resilience. It means strong balance sheets. It means cash in the bank. It means strong cash flows. It's become more important than ever to make sure our business plans are that much more robust, that we can hit those figures, and that should there be unknown unknowns, we can withstand the pushback we're necessarily going to get. Business plans which rely on the finest of details working out, they're not the ones I'd ever want to invest in, because in the next 5 years, another massive global shock is going to happen. I don't know what it is, but I guarantee you, I know it's going to happen. And I knew this one, in one sense, was going to happen. I didn't know it was going to be COVID, but I knew something was due because it had been about 10 years since the last financial crisis. And so I'd made sure I'd had a lot of cash into the technology companies which survived the last financial crisis. And guess what? That's what worked. I didn't know it was going to be COVID, but I knew I needed resilient companies to invest in.
Well, the UK has a rich set of crowdfunding platforms. They got in early, have been going strong ever since. And do you think the crowdfunding model is going to outstrip the angel and VC model anytime soon?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I used to be an angel investor, used to be. I now will only ever go through a crowdfunding platform. I get people sending me business plans and pitches and all the rest of it. And I say to them, look, guys, I need you to put it through the crowdfunding platform so that I can compare apples with apples. Because if you don't put it through there, then, I'm looking at your documents. I've got to compare it with those. It becomes a lot more difficult. And I'd rather my life was made easier. And people might say, well, you're missing loads of opportunities. You're missing some really great opportunities. Well, they might be right. There's great opportunities all the time. If I really wanted the greatest opportunities, I'll go to my alma mater university and I'll go to their science department and I'll say, hey guys, what are you guys producing? But that'll be a bit early stage. So I think more angels are going to move towards the platforms. And I see that happening already. We've got organizations in the UK like Investors, which is investors, but with an E, or with the letter E at the front, Investors. They used to be just pure angel. Now what they do is they take all their angels, they put them into the platform so they can see everything. And that's the way it's going to go. It's going to go that way.
Great. So what's your investment thesis for making investment decisions, both either personally or through your job there? What do you look for in startups?
Yeah. So let's talk, startups is one, and I'll put that to one side. Then there's public listed companies. Public listed companies is where I started off. So on the hedge fund side, it was the quoted companies. That's where I started off. And I still do that. And that's what I love the most. And because it's easy. If I want to get out of Apple, I click a button. I'm out of there. I don't need to negotiate with somebody. I don't need to find a seller. It's the most efficient market in the world. Now there, in a perverse sense, it's the same thing I'm looking up for startups. I'm looking for cash flow growth, consistency of performance, low volatility, increasing revenues, increasing growth in sales and in profits, and good valuations. Because it's public markets, I can get information, technical information like the Sortino ratio or the alpha for a company. That's the public side. That's actually incredibly easy because all that data is available. It's an efficient market. With startups, I'm looking at the individual. I'm looking to see if on a crowdfunding platform they're overfunded, what the momentum is. I want to see some traction. I don't mind so much, obviously, if they're not growing revenues, but I want to see growth. I want to see growth in whatever metrics they've got. And if you think about it, those were the things which got Peter Thiel excited about Facebook when it wasn't profitable. It was ridiculously good metrics, whatever those metrics were. And we'll worry about the profits a little bit down the line, but it's really the individual and the traction. How have they really managed to get some energy behind it? As opposed to just a blank sheet of paper where somebody goes, hey, we've got an early cancer detection process. Well, may work, may not. I don't know what great thing if it did, but show me some traction, show me some momentum. So I'm very much what you might call a momentum investor.
That's great. We always ask for the growth story ourselves. Something has to be moving in the deal to get investors going. So I think that's a good point. Can you mention one or two startups that fit your thesis?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and just to make sure my memory wouldn't go blank, I even have them in front of me. I'll tell you, I'm going to give you one with a US connection and one sort of with another US connection as well, just because I know whilst you've got a global audience. So we had one company called Air for Life. Now, what it does is it took technology out of NASA's space shuttle program. It was air purification technology. And actually, there's a Texas link to this because the technology was developed in one of the universities out of Texas. And what this company did is they realized that the air purification technology on the shuttle was far better and superior, as you'd expect, than anything else out there. So they modified it, added it, and they now use it in everything from hospitals to ambulances. During COVID, their sales have gone through the roof. So we brought them to the United Kingdom, turned them into a British global headquartered companies. The guy's exporting like crazy around the world. He's got everything from in-car air purifiers, which if I told you this 12 months ago, you would have said, well, nice little gimmick. Now we're all thinking, heck, Uber. Yeah, I want to make sure there's those air purifiers in the car. So if somebody sneezes, it can take the contaminated out a lot quicker and a lot better. So that was one. As I say, it's called Air for Life. Phenomenal technology. There's another one, Worldwide Generation. Now, they use blockchain to solve a major problem governments and NGOs around the world have, which is how can you make sure the money is getting to the people it's supposed to get to? Okay, so when governments give aid or NGOs do, and the NGOs might be a spin out from a major conglomerate. It could be Microsoft's foundation, or it could be the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or it could be whatever. UN, for instance. And as you'll know, the UN Social Development Goals mandate that we want to eradicate diseases, poverty, and a whole bunch of other things. Well, all of this requires money. So how can we make sure the money's getting to where it's supposed to? They use blockchain technology to make sure that the money has got to the person it's supposed to, and it's with it they've purchased what they're supposed to purchase, and so on. And blockchain is very clever at being able to, because it's a ledger in the good old way of how we used to write it down in the old days. Because it's a ledger, you can tell every step of the way. So that company's called Worldwide Generation. They gave a talk at the UN, I think one of the offshoot events at the General Assembly about 2 or 3 years ago. And they were introduced to Unilever at that meeting, and lots of great things have happened since then. And they're working with the UN now. So that company has been growing phenomenally. And actually, I got an email from the founder. That's one of the companies, which again, globally headquartered in the UK. The founder is from Sri Lanka originally, married to an Australian, globally headquartered in the UK. And now that technology is gradually being used by governments and being used by the private sector. So those are just a couple of the examples which I'm very excited about. And we want technologies which are going to change the world and solve the world's biggest problems. So clean air, Air for Life is one. And how do we ensure we fulfill the UN Social Development Goals? Another major one. Well, that's one of the technologies which helps do that.
Well, those are quite compelling. So you deal with a lot of startups. What do you think is the main challenge startups face today in launching their business?
I still think, the startups will still tell you it's access to capital. Now, there's a two-way street on that. Some people might say, well, it's difficult to access capital if the product's not great. But let's say you've got a great product. Very often, you might just not have great networks. And as you and I know, a warm introduction is worth its weight in gold, okay? Even if you've got a great product, if you don't have the right networks, you didn't go to the right schools, all of those things, they make a difference. So part of what the Global Entrepreneur Program does, is we use our networks as deal makers to help those companies which we think are outstanding to open doors to capital or to customers, because that's obviously capital doesn't necessarily mean equity or debt. It could just be that you get a great sales order. And, we open doors to those. Could be loans, could be grants. And we help them through our networks piggyback on us, because very often great entrepreneurs, they're sitting there and they're great at what they're doing, but why should they necessarily have had the best network? So I guess it's that. I guess it's access to capital, but really it's access to networks. It's the old saying, it's who you know, not what you know. I mean, these entrepreneurs are great at what they know. They might not necessarily have the who you know part, and our job is to try and fill that gap.
Right. And then on the other side of that table, what's the challenge you see investors struggling with today?
It's a good question. I think there's a lot of people who've suddenly decided they want to invest. Okay, so let's put to one side the experienced investor, the expert investor. Let's talk about the brand new ones, the ones who might be watching this and thinking, you know what, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on. I'm sitting here in the States. I want to invest. And it's a first-time investor, and they don't necessarily know what to look for, because human nature loves stories. They find an entrepreneur who tells them a great story, but hey, where's the hard numbers? Numbers. So what I'd say to people is, please look at the data. And once you've looked at the data, back it up. What's the verification? What's the source of that data? Do not ever just fall for the story. Stories schmories. The best technology companies in the world might have had absolutely rubbish stories. I mean, if I described a company which rates the looks of women, you'd say, what the heck? I don't want to invest in that. Well, that was Facebook. Forget the stories. Look at the hard numbers behind it. How many people are signing on? Why? What's the credentials of the individual? So I'd say the hardest thing new investors are finding is knowing what they're supposed to do, and they're seduced by stories as opposed to boring, hard Excel spreadsheets.
Well, that's a good point. Well, you see a wide range of startups coming through. Are there any particular sectors or applications you think are good immediate opportunities for investors to pursue today?
I used to always say blockchain, because everyone was getting excited about blockchain. So I was getting excited about blockchain, try and find the right stuff. And it's there, but you still got to do your due diligence. I'm from a fintech background. So what excites me the most is fintech. I've got to say, if somebody talks to me about other sectors, I go, yeah, I know they're important, but I love fintech, particularly just more efficient movement of capital, anything which makes your life easier. So if I can just pay somebody by clicking a button, guess what? That's going to be huge. Anything that removes those frictions. But outside of my own sector, what really excites me, agriculture technology. Now, I don't know anything about it, but the more I read, there's more and more issues about providing food efficiently, effectively, clean, without destroying the planet, ensuring that farmers have a livelihood as well. So I guess that this whole sector of agri-tech, which we didn't hear too much about. But if you think about it, you think about the innovations in wheat in the 1960s, again, came out of the US, and how the yield just jumped. Oh, well, that was called agri-tech before there was agri-tech. And the millions of lives, hundreds of millions of lives, that innovation saved because the genetic modification of the wheat. So I'd say agri-tech at the moment's pretty exciting stuff. But like I said when I started this interview, I just get excited by all of it. Even if I'm not a specialist in that area, and whilst I did science at school, I did mathematics, physics, and chemistry at school, this is all way beyond me, but I just get excited by all of it. Whenever they're solving a major problem which has a higher purpose, like saving lives, feeding people, that's got an extra level of excitement.
Well, that's great. Well, the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
We've covered pretty much everything. The last thing I'd say is, look, you'll have a large US audience out there. Please come and have a look at the United Kingdom as a place to invest in and to establish a company and a corporate headquarters if you're looking at the future, not least because we have this special relationship with the world's largest market, the United States, and we continue having this geographic proximity and special relationship with the world's second largest market, which is the European Union. So we're nestled, and as well as being in our own right, the fifth largest economy in the world. So, we've got the best of all worlds. So do have a look at the United Kingdom for investment and also for establishing business as well. I think it's often overlooked. We're not as good as the Americans at sort of beating the drum, as it were. And I think people will often find great value and great companies and great science out of the United Kingdom, which is often overlooked.
Well, that's a great point. So how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Well, I think you're going to provide them with my LinkedIn link, and there's the messenger on there. There's also the website, tech2great.com, and that's got contact details as well, tech2great.com. But yeah, LinkedIn's probably the easiest and quickest way, rather than giving you a rambling email address. But what I normally do is when they get a message on there or they're linked up with me, I then give them my email address and we can communicate sort of a bit easier than on LinkedIn.
Well, we'll put those in the show notes. Want to thank you for joining us today. Hope you have back for a follow-up soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Halti Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.